I am so excited to share this lovely lady with you today. We met just a couple of months ago, and I mean, you can disagree if you want to, but I feel like there was some kind of God connection like right away when we met. And I love when that happens because I feel like there are certain people in the world that God has just preordained you to connect with in a powerful way, and He's got plans and purpose for
Yeah.
that. And I feel like that with this lady. So meet my friend B. And I'm just gonna be just introduce yourself. And can you, I don't know how many people ask you about this, but can you like also tell us about the origin of your name? Because it's very significant
Yes.
to who you are and what you do.
Yeah, it is. So yes, my name is B, Andreen, and gosh, it's like that question, right? Tell me a little bit about yourself. So I'll start with what I want to be known for. Through a lot of my life challenges, I really had this blessing from the Holy Spirit that was learning to see the best in people because I didn't always have people around me that saw the best in me. But inside, I knew I had so much to offer. And God was really working in my heart, but I didn't recognize that it was God like bubbling up my goodness to the surface. And so during that season, I got to learn how to distill people and really like sift up the best in them. And so my hope for what I can be known for in this world is to really be an encourager of the good pieces of people, because I think we all have bad habits and learning that needs to be rewired, and we have things we need to let go and overcome. And so if we don't have someone who's willing to kind of see the best in us, then it's really hard for us to see the best in us. And so that's what I want to be known for. I also have a very beautifully blended family. I usually call it a combined family because blended seems so violent. So I have two wonderful children and I have two stepsons. And then I also claim a couple other children that are just bonuses, that we've kind of welcomed in the fold of our family. And so I've been really blessed to be able to love in a really unique way in my life. So that's a little bit about me. My name is really a huge part of my story and my journey of starting in the place of woundedness, of believing that I was less than. I was recovering from a narcissistically abusive relationship. And when I say that, it's hard for me to acknowledge because I was actually years outside of that relationship. And it took a long time for those words that had been spoken over me to catch up to me. And so at the beginning of me building my platform and starting to share content and really speak into people's lives and hearts and the businesses that they would create and the cool things that they would do to impact the world, I was also rebuilding my self-worth with God. And so BEE, like Bumblebee, stands for believe, endure, evolve. So the very first step of my journey was first believing that I was more than I had learned to believe about myself. And that was a season. It was not a quick endeavor. And then the longer piece was enduring the discomfort of how my relationships would change, the many failures that I would have, the ways that I would beat myself up and almost go back to this girl who really felt pitiful inside. And then, of course, is this evolution of saying, this is the new person that I am and that I get to bless others with. And that evolution is kind of like the icing on the cake. Like you've gone through all the hard things, you've really kind of rebuilt your entire self. And it's funny how on the outside people don't get to see that. So internal work for me is something I'm really passionate about, because sometimes I'm surprised by even really close family members. They don't recognize the changes that I had to make on the inside to be better. And they don't recognize my definition of better. And they're honestly not that curious. And so it's kind of an interesting story that we have internally when we rework something to really dive into what God's called us to do in our lives. So there's a bit about me and my name and how I kind of ended up with that nickname. So
That's amazing. I love that. And so did people, because your name is Brittany, right?
yes,
Your
yeah.
given name. And so did people call you B as a nickname all your life? Like, was that just a thing?
Yeah, so actually back in high school I was surrounded by this group of kids, and I wasn't raised as a Christian, but in high school, I found the Lord and I started singing in a Christian youth band. And during that time, the kids who were in our band, so they were our drummers and our guitar players and some of our production guys, some of the gals that sang with me, they called me BA because my initials are BA, Brittany Andreen. And so that was really a season of my life where I felt really seen. And so B just felt really natural, especially given the acronym and kind of what I was focused on. And what I was focused on in my healing journey was really personal. So it's like I needed an acknowledgement of the steps that I was going through, but I wasn't needing to share that with everybody else. And so it was just an easy way to kind of tell people like I prefer to be called B. Another part of that story that's a little bit harder to share is that I had not one but multiple relationships with men who I would be like we would be dating or getting to know each other, and men in my life would make these comments about my name. So they would maybe use my name to pick on me. One of my ex-boyfriends from years and years and years ago called me Bratney. And those things really landed with me. I've always had a really sensitive heart. And so weirdly enough, my name was really tied to some of the trauma that I had stepped through in more significant stories than that. But it was just a season in my life where I really needed to shed that old identity, and coming up with a nickname just helped me to step into a new and really feel like kind of a new vessel that God was getting to like recreate and restore. So
Oh my gosh, I love that. And,
yeah,
I wish that more people would have the courage to do things like that. I mean, you see that in the Bible. The Lord
yeah,
changed people's names, not once, but several times, changed their names when he was changing their identity. And I feel like if more people had the courage to do that, to listen to his prompting when it's time for a complete identity shift,
yeah.
and it's not overnight. I mean, it takes a long time sometimes, but I think that um well, I want to go into the labeling thing because that's kind of who you are.
Sure, yeah, it is.
And what you stand for. Y'all see, can you see if you're on YouTube, my Lose the Label sweatshirt? I love it. Um, B has a company called Emboldened Label. You'll call it a company, right? Like a business.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like
Um,
it's a personal development platform and I guess business development now.
yeah,
Unplanned,
that's
but God
amazing.
gave me that. Yeah.
And so I know that is she comes by this honestly, right? It's through a process and a journey with the Lord that he has shown her all of this. And so I really want you to tell us about Embolden Label and the lose the label. So many of us, and everybody wears labels, right? All
Yeah.
people wear labels. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, some of them are self-imposed, some of them are put on us by other people. But all of them, whether good or bad, have some sort of effect on us.
Yeah.
And so, can you just dig into that? Because I know that a lot of people struggle in that area, and I think you have a lot to say.
Yes, I'd be happy to share some of those stories. And it's hard. There's so many founding stories that go into this. And I guess it's important for me to say I wasn't always somebody who was talking negatively to myself. That was not who I was in my younger years. I was actually quite self-assured and quite confident. Sometimes I would trigger people because I just kind of carried myself without that negative internal voice. And that doesn't mean I didn't have negatives running underneath the surface. I was a very resilient young woman. And my negative self-talk didn't really start until after that relationship that I had, where I really was in a relationship with a bully, but I left with the bully and the bully became me. And so I kind of took his words and I just began kind of repeating them to myself because to some extent, I believed the things that were spoken over me. And that sort of created a spider web of me taking all of the times in my life where I'd been criticized and sort of like catching and holding them and then speaking those same things over myself. So there was a critical moment where I started to realize that these were tags, that these were labels that I was actually wearing. So I was a glorified admin assistant. I worked in a family business, and I always say I was the chief of everything no one else wanted to do. And truly, I loved my job. I was a single mom, so it gave me the flexibility and autonomy to have, the time to be a good mom and to wear both hats, mom and dad, in my household, but creating an income for myself and living, you know, a little more comfortably than maybe some single moms get to live. And I was renting office space from a development company. They did like corporate training programs and executive coaching. And it was funny because the founders really saw something in me and were coaching me behind the scenes. I didn't even recognize what they did. I didn't even know. I mean, at that point in my life, I had never even heard of Brene Brown, just to give you like some context here. So they invited me to co-facilitate a training at one of the largest corporations in America. And the qualifier of that was all you need is a business suit. Like you don't need to worry about anything else. You're good with all that you know. Just come, bring a business suit. So I flew to LA. That morning, I'm in my hotel room. I get dressed up in this business suit. And mind you, like I'm a single mom who works in bookkeeping behind the scenes in an office by myself at my house. Like I'm not getting out. I'm not super important. I'm not rubbing elbows with executives. Like that was not my life. So I put this business suit on and I stand in front of the mirror and like all of the confidence is there. I'm like, this is so cool. Like this moment could change my life. And it was like I was getting a free pass into a life and a career that I didn't know this career even existed at one point in my life. So it was just such a special moment. And so I drive to the campus, this huge corporate campus. There's like 3 security checkpoints, and I had to go through the final security checkpoint where I would be escorted to the executive elevator that would lead me to the executive floor of this building. Okay. And all of
Fancy.
that was, I know. Well, so I didn't really have a frame for that though. You say fancy, and like I didn't, it didn't really hit me until I was in it and I was being escorted. And it was the eyes of everyone around me that made me go like, oh, this is a big deal. And then I started seeing people dressed a little bit elevated, right? So the fashion was increasing. I would pass women with these beautiful, vibrant colored suits that looked very expensive and their hair was perfect. And the intimidation starts to kind of grow. You're going like, I don't belong here, right? That was like the feeling that was building. And there's this hustle and bustle. So I hadn't yet started that conversation in my head. So I get on this elevator. It's a gorgeous wood elevator. I mean, just you can about imagine the fancy in this. And so the doors, the elevator close, and immediately I feel this like really irritating itch on the back of my neck. Well, I reach back to try to just kind of, subtly adjust my suit jacket. And it's this embroidered label that when it was washed, it kind of became wonky. And so it was like tipped up and poking into the back of my neck skin here. And I, in that moment, had felt this like trapped feeling of, I don't have a way out of this. Like I can't cut this tag off. I can't rip it out. I am stuck with this for an 8-hour day in the most high pressure situation I've ever been in. And it was like that tag and that itch and irritation represented all of the negative things that I say about myself. And in a 30-second elevator ride, I don't know if that's the exact time, I told myself, you're underqualified, you're uneducated, you're too young, no one's going to respect you. They're going to laugh you out of the room. You're going to embarrass your mentors. You do not belong here. And it was like, boom, 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 boom. You're worthless. So I had to carry that not enoughness into this room and then perform as if none of those things existed. Now, nobody knew what was going on in me. My mentors didn't see it. Luckily, I was able to kind of like pull it together. But on the ride back down the elevator, I recognized that we all have these negative labels that kind of represent the criticisms or the less thans or the even sometimes too much, when we feel like we're too much for others. Yeah, and we tuck them in and we try to like hide them, and we run out of real estate within our inner selves. And so I find that especially people who have really important things to share, they have really important impact to make, they oftentimes will be the ones who have kind of stacked the negatives to where there's no more room for good. There's no more room for success. So that's the really foundational story of how these negative labels became like an obsession of mine to tear out, to reframe, to redefine. and to really kind of like live free from.
That's incredible. And so now you work with people, individuals, as well as businesses. So tell me about that, because I think that anybody listening has probably identified with one or multiple points in your story. Like I was raising my hand. If you're not watching on YouTube, you couldn't see, you could see it, but yes and yes. I think most of us have been in situations, maybe not the fancy, but for sure the feelings.
Yeah.
So tell me how you work with people who struggle in these areas, and um, give us some tips on what we can do to start to cut those things out so that we can start to move forward, because they really do or can keep us paralyzed.
For sure. So I'll start with, since this is a business podcast, I think this is important to share. And we were both recently at the Hope Story conference where our friend Melissa Hughes, she talked about niches and really speaking to like that one person who really needs your message. I really didn't follow that advice for a long time in my business because I didn't want to leave anybody out. And so if I got a phone call from a male business owner, I would help him. And if I got a phone call from a grandmother whose grandkids wouldn't speak to him, and it was very difficult for me to like hone in on a certain person that I'm able to help, because really this message is global and we do all have these negative labels to work through. And it's amazing because we can be really confident in one area of our lives or many areas of our life. And I have found that everybody still has one slice of struggle left. And it goes back to that thing, like God doesn't promise us that we're not going to have hardship, right? He actually almost guarantees it, but he also promises us that he's going to embolden us. He's going to train us how to get through those things. And so I have really found that I had to sort of narrow the focus of who I help. And so luckily God's so good. And he's really shown me that female Christian business owners and non-believers as well, who are curious about inserting God into their business. That's really who I've been shown are the people that I have the most impact with. So I would say who I am not for is the highly competitive, high take charge, high sense of urgency, highly objective person, which unfortunately in our current business landscape is the recipe for success. So if you take someone who has a need to win, who has a need to be in charge, who loves to get stuff done, they're very task oriented and they don't question themselves, and they're also very logical, those are the most likely to succeed. And the reason is they can move 10 times faster than the majority of us.
Right.
So I would tend to say I work with sensitive business owners, but all that means is like a dial turned down from that person you see who seems completely unaffected by anything. And you and I both know some people like this, like they just make it look easier. So that's who I help.
Everybody comes in a different space and everybody has a different goal for what they would need as an outcome from having you as a coach. And I love the fact that in your bio you say personal cheerleader. Y'all, if you don't have a personal cheerleader, you need one. Everybody needs a personal cheerleader. Everybody.
Yeah.
You think you don't. Like I've always been, please don't take this the wrong way if you are the cheerleader type, but I've always been the one, because I didn't make the cheerleading squad because I was deemed not worthy, that I've always been, cheerleaders, whatever. And it's
Yeah.
it's so not me. It's not, my personality is not that. They were absolutely right to turn me down from the cheerleading squad. But I have friends that the Lord has graciously put in my life who are my cheerleaders, and they will, one person in particular, she will get in my face when I am being mean to myself, and she'll say, "Stop talking about my friend that way. Stop it." And so I know that as individuals and as business owners, having that coach and personal cheerleader who can see objectively where you're at and help you see the things that are blocking you from moving forward in whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Can be beneficial. So tell us a little bit about how you work with people in that way to get them unstuck.
For sure. So I would say those friends that are cheerleaders in that way, they're critically important. They interrupt the negative self-talk, and they're able to like stop us in our tracks and move us forward in almost like a profound way. And I wish I was like that, I guess bold. I don't tend to be that bold, but the coach and cheerleader component for me is really critical, because the cheerleader for me is less of that rah rah and more of a consistent voice of encouragement. So I think about like all of the cheerleading games, or the cheerleading games, that didn't make sense. All of the sports games that I was a cheerleader at, like our job was repetitive. We didn't do anything different or new. It was just like that consistent encouragement. So I brought up being able to distill up the best in others. My job is to like keep you focused on that best piece of you, and then add those positive traits that you see yourself as a blessing as we shed off some of the negatives that make you feel like a burden. And so my specialty really is in that I am able to craft the work that each of my clients needs based on where they are in their journey. And what I would say that the coach piece of that does is that sometimes when someone tells us to stop it, it's great, right? It interrupts us for that moment. But I found that oftentimes we can't actually undo that negative thought until we deal with the root problem. So
Mm.
I'm going to take you to a label in order to give your audience a little more context, because my work can almost be overwhelmingly overwhelming. And so I want to make sure I simplify this. So since you brought up the cheerleader piece, the cheerleader label, I'll share with you guys that I had a lot of issues around being a cheerleader. So I danced professionally after high school, and my very first time auditioning for the Phoenix Suns dancers, I was cut on the first cut. Like, it was mortifying. Didn't even make it past the first rounds, which is like it's not high pressure. I mean, it's kind of, once you've become a professional cheerleader, it's almost like embarrassing to tell people you got cut on the first round, which is, just a part of my story. So a couple of years later, I tried out again. I ended up doing 3 seasons in professional sports. However, during that season of my life, I had more judgment and more harsh questions asked of me that were rooted in really inappropriate things. And so I learned that as a cheerleader, people thought I was dumb, that I was promiscuous, that I was looking to marry a rich man, so gold digger, and that I essentially had no value other than being a pretty face.
Wow.
And so I walked out of this really amazing life experience where I was a cheerleader, which is a label, with all of these negatives attached to the label. And so in my journey of becoming a coach and personal cheerleader for people, I had to actually go in and look at what about cheerleading gave me part of a foundation of who I am today. And how can I renew this label? How can I redefine it and wear it as a professional and be proud of my story without all of these hard and harsh judgments that came with that season of life? And it has been really difficult that has been a really challenging label for me personally to get past. So I would say that every business owner who's listening, they have a moment in their lives where someone said something to them, and it may not have even been a direct story. Like, I have a client who she was constantly compared to a cockroach by a family
What?
member
What?
as a child. So like her label that she had to work through was cockroach. However, I've had many other clients. This is probably the most popular one, right? They would have somebody who made them feel bad about themselves or invalidated them as people. And so they started wearing this tag, not enough, even though nobody ever said to them that they weren't actually enough, right? So we can get negative labels in multiple different ways. And essentially, the label is the category that our brain placed this conversation or this experience in. And we are usually unaware of what that label actually is. And so that's why the work that I do is really important, because it's a process of consistently tearing that tag off of you, just like you would a retail tag, and choosing to wear this new style, right? So if I was going to pull off this tag that said burden, I'm going to replace it with blessing, but what makes me a blessing to my clients or to my customers? So I hope that that gives some context around what you're asking, because truly, when we do deep dives into this, it really is a customized experience for each of my clients.
Yeah.
And I did find, so you know that I have a certification in an inner healing modality that's Christian based. And the reason for that is occasionally I would run into trauma. So the client who was compared to a cockroach, her story and that label, it was rooted in trauma. This was not something that we could just tear out and move past and redefine. We had to really go to the root of the problem and decide what really happened underneath and kind of rewrite her childhood story in order for her to succeed past that label.
I think that so many times, whatever your label is, right? So many times you think you don't have childhood stuff that is the root cause. But
Yeah.
to B's point, having to get into that root cause can show you so much about how you show up in the world and, things that areas you need to work on in your life and that you
Yeah.
need to let God heal. I feel like one of the things that I would really love to dig into just a little bit is for, female business owners specifically. It's
Mhm.
we live in a man's world, even despite so much of the feminism that, is so prevalent. But um I think that we can feel less than because we are women in
Mhm.
the workspace or in the business space or, whatever around the tables that we're at, and it keeps us quiet.
Yeah.
Um, if you have listened, I don't know what episode it is, y'all. I'll go back and look. I'll tag it in the show notes, but I think I did an episode on my word of the year. Um, Maybe I didn't. If I didn't, I need to.
You need to, yeah.
Yes, I'll fix that. But my word of the year this year is roar. And I literally found myself shrinking away from that word, even though the Lord gave me that word because I thought it was going to be too much for people.
That's another label, right?
Yes,
Yeah, it's a big
absolutely.
one.
And so I really think you and Tiffany in that conversation that we had at the conference really kind of helped solidify, okay, you don't have to fear being too much for people. This is how
Yeah.
God made you, and you need to embrace the roar. And so anyway, I would love for you to talk about a little bit about that if
Yeah.
you know what
So
that is. That
I'm
was a
gonna
lot.
riff on this. Yeah, I've got a lot to say. So when I met you at the conference, and I told you this right away, which is really awkward. I do awkward things. I kind of make people uncomfortable sometimes. So hopefully it didn't, but I really quickly recognized like a spirit in you that I was really drawn under. Now, when I say that, that can be really quickly taken out of like taken the wrong way, almost as if you're like intimidating or you're dominating or something like that. But what I mean by that is Jan has a really protective spirit about her, and there's a spirit in me that really has needed women like Jan to come and be that protective spirit during seasons of my life where I wasn't protecting myself. I didn't have good discernment. I didn't have good self-confidence or self-worth. And I did have friends like Jan who had that protective spirit that really kind of, like really represented kind of that, like that roar, I guess. I mean, and so at the end of the conference, Tiffany Sturms told Jan that she really like represented like the mouth of God and this wise way of crafting her words. There were 3 or 4 things that you had said that really like rocked us. And it was this wise prophetic words that you had shared in stories. And it's so interesting because I think one of the first things I said to you was like, you're going to write a book. And I will buy whatever Jan writes. I don't care if she publishes it or not, because she had these really unique ways of seeing things. And then she ended up telling us that her word for the year is roar. So as we were getting ready to start this podcast episode, I asked God, like, what do you want me to share that would be impactful, that would be helpful, both to Jan and her audience, but also for like the journeys that each of your listeners is on. And so literally, it's so funny how God works, because last week I was in Phoenix, Arizona, and there's this zoo not very far from my folks' house. And it's not like the city zoo. It's like an out, it's out in the sticks kind of zoo. And it's the coolest zoo because you can get really, really close to the animals, and it's just a more interactive experience. And the animals have a bit more room to run, so they tend to be a little more active. So we were walking around this new area. It's like the safari area, and the lions are in like the premium spot. Okay. It's the premium spot of this whole brand new area that they've built. And if anyone's listening and they're in Arizona, it's called the Wildlife World Zoo. And so we're walking around and we get to the lions, and I didn't realize it at this point, but the lion enclosure is in an area, and I call it the premium spot because there are 3 different points where you get to kind of meander around this lion enclosure with like different views of the animal and different ways to kind of see into the enclosure. And that's why I call it the premium spot. It's like marketing. Think about like the lion has the most real estate. Okay. And so the one side, and the lion is crouched into the corner. His head is facing the kind of wall, and it's the only spot in this whole enclosure that doesn't have a view of the lion. So he's quite literally hiding in the one place where nobody can really see him. So I'm with my nephew who's 4, and he like just wants to see the lion's face. So I'm like, well, let's keep walking and we'll see if we can see the lion's face. So we meander around this, this whole safari area, and then come to the second point where we can see him. Well, wouldn't you know it, he has changed positions just slightly, and he's still crouched in a way where we can't see his face. And, so my nephew's like, I just want to see his face. I just want to see his face. And we caught like a little bit of a turn, but we could not see his face. So we kept meandering, and I said, well, maybe there's another spot we can see him. So sure enough, we get to that third real estate spot, right? This lion has the most opportunities to be seen. We get to that third spot, and wouldn't you know it, he had switched sides and he was now facing the opposite direction, still crouching, still showing his face. And so we waited. We sat there and we waited. And the lion turned for a split second where we got to see a full profile, side profile of his face, and he yawned. And oh my gosh, my nephew was excited. He's 4. He's like, I see him, I see his face, and he's yawning. And we had this moment, and I didn't think anything of it until today when God showed me this image and showed me a whole different view on this image and how it relates to Christian business owners with heart-centered offers. And what it reminded me of is how we can have these heart-centered offers. We can have all of this goodness that we've tied up and wrapped up, and we know God's helped us create. And we are competing in a marketplace where people are not playing by the same rules that we are. And so they're louder than us, and their marketing is maybe, flashier or brighter or whatever. Like, it's woven with different things than maybe ours are. And I think that as we step on our business journey, we kind of create something and we put that offer out there. And we've got kids around our cage, which are our customers, right? And we get shut down. People don't buy our offer. They don't see the value in it. They don't understand it. They don't ask questions. And most of our ideal customers aren't going to sit around and wait to see our face. And yet, so it turns into this like game where we as Christian business owners start to kind of like, we want to protect our offer. And so we turn our face. We stop sharing it. We stop learning how to market it better, or learning how to make it flashy and be able to compete in the marketplace. We tell ourselves lies that if we learn marketing or learn how to sell it properly, that somehow we're like violating God, or somehow we're violating ourselves, instead of standing strong and really roaring out what our products and services can do for the marketplace and for consumers. And what made me think of you in this story was that when this lion yawned, you really saw the power of what that roar could be, because his mouth opened really big and it was just like a roar, only his body just kind of like yawned, like, ah.
Mm-hmm.
And when we are stuck inside of an enclosure, when we're stuck inside those lies that the enemy speaks over us, I wonder if we aren't able to really roar because we haven't like let ourselves out of that cage. We're not facing our ideal customer with pride and confidence that God gave us over what he is calling us into. So
So
anyway.
good. So good. Oh my gosh. Yes. And I think um I want to circle back to one thing you said about heart-centered, because I'm not
Mhm.
sure that everyone understands that terminology. And I think it's important for us to understand, because for some people, um, that might be well, it feels, I'm just going to use this label, that
Sure.
it can feel soft.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, it is.
but in the context that you're using it, it's not soft. And so I just want people to understand how you're using heart-centered, because I think it's important for the conversation.
Yeah, so I don't like working with business owners that care about taking fancy vacations and building mansions. And it's not that it's not a judgment. It's that my story of success was rooted in the fact that I, as a single parent, had 100% responsibility to make sure that I can keep a roof over my head and food on my table, but also build a legacy where my kids will not struggle later in life. And that came with a need to provide financially, but also a need to provide emotionally
Mm.
and to be getting healthy myself and to rebuild some of the brokenness that existed in our home. So I find that business owners often are born out of a need or a want. Okay. So if your business is born out of a want, it's probably coming from, I can't stand my job. I can't live like this anymore. I want to start a business. I want to work on my own time so that I can take a fancy vacation once in a while, right? There's nothing wrong with that. However, when a business owner plants their offer out of a need, it's usually from, it really is usually from a dark season or a painful situation.
Yeah.
And so that is where in my work, the heart center comes from. So I like to work with heart-centered business owners because usually if someone has been listening to a really specific conversation and that conversation makes them uber qualified to create something. So for you, we've talked before about you feeling like you couldn't do web and graphic design because there's this conversation that if you didn't go to college for it and you don't have a marketing background, that you don't know what you're doing. You and I both know that's a lie, but so many of us have those limitations around our businesses. And
Right.
yet you obviously see a need for the clients that you build sites for and create logos for. You see a need for those clients to be seen, to be understood, and to be like very clearly marked as the heart center that those folks have. And so I think the heart-centered piece for me, although I will say it is soft, it really comes down to a mission drive, right? So it's, I want to take an underserved population of people and I want to serve them and figure out a way to make enough income to justify my time and see if it can grow from there, right? I don't think there's anything wrong with our businesses making a lot of money or succeeding beyond a certain point. However, the heart center at the beginning of that is, for example, I have a client who really wants to serve teenage girls between 13 and 16, very specifically that season where their identities are being spoken over by really men and women their ages. And sometimes they are not being seen by their parents in a positive way, because sometimes teenagers are really hard to have in your home, right? So that client
Yes.
understands that there's not a lot of money, or there's not a lot of money out there. Like 13 to 16-year-olds they don't have a lot of income to buy courses and programs or to spend money on a retreat or something of that nature. So she's working within the confines of knowing that she has to get creative to serve this audience, and a responsibility that serving this audience is a big, important deal.
I believe that you can have a heart-centered business without having to attach the word soft to it, because heart-centered can be very hard, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, maybe it's just me. Maybe I need to work through that. I
I was
burst
going to say it
against
might be a
anything
way you see
soft.
the label.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
interesting because so there are a couple of things that work against those of us who are wired maybe more sensitively. And when I say work against, I will let you know these traits make your impact and your influence critical for the world today. It's kind of like what we would say about faith. Like if I'm working as the heart of God, I'm not going to be accepted in every room that I walk into, but it doesn't mean I shouldn't be walking into those rooms, right?
Oh, that's good.
Jesus didn't have limitations when he went into the places where he wasn't accepted. He went anyway.
Yeah.
And those of us who have these certain traits, we will tend to tell ourselves like, yeah, I'm not doing that. Like, I don't do public speaking, or I'm not starting a podcast because I don't like the sound of my voice, or I'm not going to write a book because I'm not a writer and nobody's going to read it. Okay. So these are some of those lies we would tell ourselves. But the qualities are what I would call a sensitive resiliency, meaning some of the things that happen in my life land on me. They affect me more, and they maybe might kickstart that inner voice that I have. Someone who's high resiliency, they don't have that. Someone
Mm.
who has a quick, I have a friend who's a business owner. She's high resiliency. She's the type of person, the horse can be dead and she will still be asking it to get up and ride. Like that's just how high resiliency she is. She doesn't even recognize the horse is dead. She's like off in the sunset, right? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
she just has this but she's just unaffected compared to me. Okay. Another thing is objectivity. So if I am more subjective than I am objective, if I have more of a heart or feeling based way of thinking, I'm actually really uniquely qualified to create solutions to problems that are probably going to be more likely to work. However, because I'm subjective, I'm going to get caught in my feelings more often as a business owner. So there are going to
Mm.
be some challenges that come up with that. And I'm going to have to get tools to learn how to be objective in certain situations or to work with highly objective people. So that's another trait. There's several other that I could bring up. I think the third, I'm going to do two more. The third would be like my, I'm going to call it my rule follower tag. Okay. If I tend to be a rule follower, then I'm going to be more critical of people who I think are breaking the rules, and I'll
Mm.
get stuck in comparison more often. And I'll be less likely to push the boundaries and the comfort zone of my own business because I'm a rule follower. So I'm like comfortable within the walls I currently have. And so there's this like almost like a violation of self to move those boundary lines because it's all I've known, right? So we
Mm.
talk a lot in this world about boundaries keeping us safe, but sometimes boundaries, self-imposed boundaries, can keep you small. The fourth
Oh,
one
sure.
that I think I see show up, God, there's so many. I could riff on this for a while, but the last one I'll share is highly competitive people will be seen as almost stepping on you to get to their success. And so anytime you start a business, I don't care what industry you're in, I don't care what business you're starting, you will almost immediately bump into someone who's bigger, moves faster, and has more influence than you. And the part of the reason for that is you start talking with your spouse about your business and your phone is within earshot. Within 24 hours, you're going to start getting targeted ads from someone who's been doing it for 20 years. Okay. It doesn't necessarily mean they're highly competitive, but it means they're winning in the marketplace. So if you don't have high competitive, like if you're not that like internal, I have to win kind of person, you're going to tend to get stuck in comparison more often, or you're just going to be like, I don't know that I want it that bad, right? Because you don't
Mm-hmm.
have that like internal drive. And so a lot of business owners will say to themselves like, well, I'm not wired like that, so I can't succeed in that way. And that's actually the problem that we have with the marketplace right now, is that many of us who have the traits that we're actually listening and we're actually solving problems, we have to learn how to step into those rooms and regain some of the spots that have been taken by people who just quite frankly have a little bit louder personality traits than we do.
To wrap this up, because it's been so rich, I would really love for you just to talk about your faith and how your faith has really affected where you've been and where the Lord has brought you, where you find yourself now. And yeah.
Yeah, man. So I would say my faith, and I think I could say this for most people who are listening, my faith has been the most important piece of my journey. It's been the most redeeming valuable. Like, I mean, it's just, if I could just describe how my relationship with God has been so complicated and how much I've reached for him despite really wanting to turn my back on Christianity and on faith. So just to give everyone a little bit of context, I have a very significant trauma that happened in my life, and my abuser used God to manipulate me. So I was at the very beginning of my faith journey. I had just become a Christian. Some people would label me at that time as a baby Christian. And really for this reason, that I was seeking the Lord, but I didn't understand him yet. And I didn't really understand scripture yet. And I didn't really know where to go and learn. And so I just like, I go to church on Sunday and I lift my hands and I'm worshiping God because it feels good stage. Okay. And in that, I linked up with a partner who really used God to taint all of the good things that God offers. And it really became the fight of my life to focus on God and allow God to really be my lover in a lot of ways. I had a lot of woundedness with men and how men had spoken over me in my life, but men had also been kinder to me than most women in my life. And so I had this really, really complicated journey, both personally and professionally, of letting God be everything to me. He was fathering me. He was my husband at the time. He was my friend. He was my protector, my soft space, my confidant. Everywhere where I had woundedness in relationship, I handed him these labels.
Mm.
And initially I thought that I was just tearing out my own tags and like, empowering myself, which I think is one of those, it's a cultural thing right now, right? Where we can say
Sure.
like, I just love myself and I just tell myself these positive affirmations. And I was doing that. I really was for the beginning stages of building my platform. And then I realized that the negative I could pull out fairly well on my own with some therapy and some of the, mental health resources we have, but it wasn't working to pour in the positive and receive the blessed things that he says about us and our identities. They weren't sticking until I let God place them on me.
Mm.
Until I went to the Lord and said, okay, God, who am I without all of this negative? And so I published a children's book in September. I didn't write a children's book. I wrote a poem for my kids at the most wounded place of our story. It was a Christmas poem, and I wanted my kids to have a version of "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" in a divorced situation, because so many pieces of the holidays came with woundedness for our family. And so I wrote this poem as a survival mechanism, as a way to bring joy into a really sad season of life and the year, quite frankly. And here I am. This year will be 10 years post-divorce for me. So I was a single mom raising a 15-month-old and a 3-year-old. And all of a sudden, God shows me this poem and he's like, publish this as a children's book. So I published this children's book. I did it I think it was 7 weeks. We went from idea to published and out in the marketplace, which is incredible. I mean, everyone who I know in the publishing world is like, that's not possible with illustrations and all the things. It was God did the whole thing. None of it, I had nothing to do with me. It was the first time in my life I have experienced godly joy and cried from a place of pure, unadulterated joy. And I didn't know that that emotion existed. And with that emotion came all of these just blessings, all of these labels. Like, for example, I became an author. I never dreamt in a million years. That was not a childhood dream of mine to become an author. And now I'm an author. And so that was just, it's just kind of a small part of my story of how I thought this was my work. And what I've realized over the course of, so I started in 2020. So in the course of 4 years, I've recognized this is God's work, and God gave me the gifts to be able to pass on the journey that I went through to other business owners that need to just get unblocked from some of those same negative mindsets.
Wow, that's incredible. So tell people who are, I know, drawn to you, how they can work with you. Like, how do they find you? Tell us all the things.
Yeah. So right now, the easiest way to get in touch with me if you want to work individually with me is just shoot me an email, b@emboldenedlabel.com. And will you link that for
Yeah,
everyone so they have my
link it all.
email?
Yep.
Yeah. And then if you want to join the community, we're in a founding member stage. So it's $50 instead of $100 per month. And my goal for the founding members is really to grow this foundation of heart-centered business owners where we are growing, we're achieving, we're succeeding together. And it's just been a really beautiful thing. So we right now have 16 members, and I'd love to add a few more founding members to that who are really passionate about what is being built. And so you can find all the information for that on emboldenedlabel.com. And I'd just love to connect with you. So even if you don't want to work with me, we just want to share a story, a label that you just recognize from listening to this episode. I love hearing, how this impacted you. And I think I speak for Jan and I both. We mentioned personality assessments. We've mentioned negative and positive labels. We've mentioned all these things. And I just want to say to those listening that when we stop believing we can be more, when we stop pursuing the Lord and what our impact and our influence is, our dream, right? Like our calling is like dying inside of us, which is a really depressing thing to think about. And so no matter what you've heard that has inspired you, or no matter what you've heard that has made you feel bad, like you have to keep going and seeking more. So don't plant your flag in this episode. If I'm not for you or Jan's not for you, find somebody who is, and chase the Lord ferociously in whatever that is that makes you feel empowered to just like reawaken that calling in your life. Because so many people that have, like, I think we could riff on the influencer thing for a long time. Like, we need good influencers to step back up and like teach people how to live in positivity and goodness and grace and honor and forgiveness and all the things.
Yeah.
So if you're listening to this and you're created for more, Jan and I can speak for the Lord and say you are. So just keep going.
Keep going. Keep going. Thank you, B, for all
You're welcome.
girl. I just am always so blessed by listening to you speak from your heart about everything that God is doing in you and through you. And you're just such a gift to the world. Thank you so much for spending time with us today. And you guys can find B in all the places linked in the show notes. And yeah.
Thank you, Jan. This was a blessing. Thank you.